Good evening to you all. I have just returned from Aspen, Colorado, where we had our races this weekend, and it was absolutely incredible. I can't say enough how inspired I am by the athletes. It's not just on the ski trails, but it's amazing. We have such wonderful intellectual conversations in the van too. So they're just incredible students and athletes. And so I'm on a high tonight because I just had so much fun working with the athletes this weekend. And I guess I feel the same way about working with all of you as TAs. You inspire me so much every day. And I've been so impressed with everything, all of the progress that you have made already this semester. And so tonight I want to start the punctibyte by talking to you a little bit about some of the things that were on the very first TA guideline. And I know that all of you read through these things, but now that you have a couple of weeks of experience of doing your job, I think it's worth our time to look back at some of them. And I don't want to dwell on any of them particularly, but I thought we could leaf through them as a whole. And this is just a few pointers maybe that I've learned over the years. And the first one I've felt like you have all done an incredible job of at this point, and that is working together as a team of TAs and really helping one another out, and remembering that even students from different sections, they listen to what we say about each other. And so when we have a positive attitude about all of the work that our fellow TAs are doing, that positive attitude is really contagious and it really gets students jazzed. So I think we've done already a really, really wonderful job of that. And I've just written down like a couple of my quotes in terms of the goal of teaching. So the goal of teaching is not to show students how much we know. That is, no one loves a king of the castle, right? Somebody who is on a power trip and trying to show students what they know. Instead, our goal should be to help students realize their own capacity to know. So I think all of you have been doing a really good job of that. There's just a couple of things that go under this goal, I guess, and that is when you're lecturing, make sure that you guard against absolutes. So a lot of times we think that something is, this is fact, like this is status quo, like even something as simple as capitalizing Graham in Grahamstain. You think, oh, well, that's somebody's first name, you should, or that's somebody's last name, you should definitely capitalize that. But it's kind of also become like a term like Kleenex, where we call it Kleenex even if it's not Kleenex, and so in some ways it's more of a term that we've incorporated into our vocabulary, and some textbooks don't incorporate Grahamstain, and they're perfectly legitimate textbooks. So it's funny how those things can happen, and even though I guess guarding against absolutes helps you when teaching. So another thing that I have learned in years of giving lectures is that it's better not to come up with an answer if you don't know the answer. So I haven't really seen anybody do this, but just in case you get asked an answer that you don't know the answer to, make sure that you just say so. Go ahead and say, I don't really know the answer, but I promise you that I'm going to look that up and check into it and get back to you on that. And then make sure you do get back to your students. And then use I statements, and this is really helpful when you're teaching in a really intimate environment. So say you are sitting with one student working one-on-one, and you're trying to help that student learn how to use their microscope, or something like, how to perfect their T-streak. And I find it works best to use I statements. So rather than saying, you're doing that wrong, or you need to do this way, say something like, I find that this works a lot more effectively for me when I do this. That really is it's a less violent way to approach your pointers for the students. I want to talk just a bit about grading too, and I think all of you have now gotten through your first grading assignments, and you've done, I think, a great job, and I've seen a lot of really reflective grading, which is absolutely awesome. One note on grading is just to be consistent, and so oftentimes that means consistency between TAs, but it also means consistency within the grading assignment that you're doing. So I find that it helps to keep an additional sheet of paper along with your rubric, so that every time you deduct a quarter a point, you make sure that you deduct that same quarter of a point for the same mistake on each student's paper. And this is something, a certain amount of subjectivity in grading is inevitable, but it's nice if we can also try to approach consistency and having the same sort of deductions for the same sort of mistakes. Clearly, there will be some mistakes that you don't see anywhere else, and you just have to make a judgment call on those. So make sure, and this is something I did sit down and talk with some of you about, if you do take a deduction on any paper or any assignment, make sure that you clearly explain to the student why you've done that. And we've all been in the situation where, as a student, we've received a deduction on a paper. Maybe, it was a lab report that you did at some point, and you received that lab report back, and all it said on it was C. Like, that was all it said. It just had big C on top of it. And nowhere in the lab report could you find any comments as to why you received that score. If you can't find a way to make a comment on the paper, there's no place for a deduction. You've got to be able to explain to the student why you've taken that deduction and clearly explain that. So in terms of, sometimes we take deductions because we don't know if what a student is saying is correct. And that's definitely a habit to break right away. So make sure that if a student says something that you don't know whether it's correct or not, go ahead and look that up. So you have to challenge yourself to check on the student and see whether what they're talking about actually might have some basis in something they maybe learned in another class. So if you're unsure about what somebody has said, make sure you do look it up. If you're struggling with finding it, also come and find me. Or if you're just struggling with an overcommitment at the moment and you need help with grading, do find me or your fellow TA, and I promise that we'll find a way to help with that. So these are just a few things that maybe will be helpful as you're grading, and I hope that you found the rubrics to be useful. Please also don't forget that your TA CD does have a key when you go to sit down to grade your unknown press releases. There is a grading key on your TA CD to help you with that. There is also a grading key, as I know most of you have already found, for the dilution problems, and I think Alex emailed out, thank you Alex for the explanation on the one little typo that was in the grading key for the dilution problems. So excellent job, and let's talk about the schedule for the upcoming week, and I'll bring that up next. And this week is our week of February 13th, and we're going to be going, for most of you, into Lab 8 and 9. And for Open Lab on Friday, Marielle and Amy, this is going to be your week for helping out in the Open Lab. So I'll look forward to seeing you or someone who is taking your place during Open Lab this week. Now, in terms of the labs that we will be doing this week, we're going to be taking on Lab 8 and 9, and I really find this to be a fun set of concepts, looking at antimicrobial substances, factors, things like antibiotics, but then going into antiseptics and disinfectants in the latter stages of the week. For Craig and Katie, you're going to be going on to labs 10 and 11, and do remember that those two labs are done together. So lab 10 is a pretty big deal, and I'll talk about that just a little bit tonight to give you the heads up on what's to come for labs 10 and 11. We talked already quite a lot about lab 8 when I did the last punctibyte, but I am going to go ahead and bring that up just so that we can take a quick review look at it. And I think the two main things on that are to make sure to split up your students so that no one station gets overcrowded. The other thing is to make sure that when you get to the hand washing experiment, that we do split them into 2 groups or even 3 groups. We can do one with hand sanitizer, one with regular hand washing. So however you would like to split that, just make sure your students do understand how we're doing that. You want to make sure that one TA hangs out near the UV light so that you help them get their lid off of their plate before they place it under the light. And then also make sure that we talk clearly and thoroughly about antibiotic resistance and selective pressure. So natural selection as a topic, make sure you understand that topic, and that it's not that antibiotics create mutation, it's that they select for already existing mutants. That's the primary meaning of natural selection, and in this case it's not necessary. Well, it is natural. It's hard to say that it's not, I guess, but it is selective pressure that we're putting onto the microbial world by the overuse and misuse of antibiotics. Great, so that really is a quick and dirty review of Lab 8, but I'll take a moment to talk about Lab 9, which is really a fun lab. I love this lab, and actually I just realized that I made my end of a long weekend mistake. We'll be doing the hand washing experiment in Lab 9, so that'll be where you'll want to split them into the 2 or 3 groups for the hand washing experiment. But we'll also be doing the antiseptics and disinfectants in this particular lab. So what that also means is during Lab 8 you may want to announce to your students that they can bring their own antiseptic or disinfectant so that they can actually try their own from home, their own substance that maybe they're interested in. So we'll also be continuing the isolation of the resistant bacteria during that lab. In Lab 9, we're also going to want to throw up a table on the board to summarize the Lab 8 results so that we can get everything regarding antibiotics summarized in one place. And I will be taking time to talk to the students about the mechanism of action of each antibiotic and really hopefully driving home that point about how antibiotics work and how they may have selective toxicity on different groups of microorganisms. Also in Lab 9, it's really important to give the students a quick heads up on what's going to be happening in Lab 10, because in Lab 10 they're going to be diving right into the experiment. We're going to be doing the first few steps of Lab 10 at the very beginning of the hour, and that's just to allow us the time that we need for those multiple incubations. That first incubation is about 20 minutes, and so that's the time that we'll be doing the first part of the lecture. So that does bring us to Labs 10 and 11, where they'll work through those first couple of steps of Lab 10, then we'll do the first part of the lecture, and then they'll work through the rest of Lab 10, and then they'll be able to go back to their during the second incubation, they'll go back to their Lab 9 results and summarize their Lab 9 results. So everything really fits in very well as long as we make sure to start those first steps at the very beginning of the hour. So in terms of Lab 10 and the lecture content for Lab 10, this is a pretty beefy lecture. And so if you've signed up for this lecture but you're just not sure about your knowledge of recombinant DNA technology, if you're struggling at all about the concepts of lateral gene transfer, let me know and I will take over on this lab for the lecture portion. So I am excited though for those of you who are wanting to do this up, and I have been really impressed with the lecture skills that you guys have been showing and your willingness to look up your own extra information to go along with the lecture. Each time you do that and take ownership, partial ownership for that lecture, your lecture quality goes through the sky. You just do an amazing job with that. So I think that summarizes largely what we'll do for Lab 10. However, we will start Lab 11 that same day, so they can work through Lab 11 likely during the 30-minute incubation as well when they're working up their Lab 9 results. So there's a lot of time as long as we plan it well. So I feel a little random tonight. I hope my randomness didn't give you any pause, but I think we're ready to go for the week ahead, and I look very much forward to seeing all of you either tomorrow or on Tuesday.